Hi, I'm John Geoghegan, and instead of my usual post, I thought I'd do something a bit different today for your personal enjoyment. Given we're entering week 2 of our self-imposed exile, I thought I would read a brief excerpt from a short story I've written called "The Mail is a Sacred Trust." It's about the time William Faulkner was employed as the postmaster in Oxford, Mississippi. Now, Faulkner was not a very promising young man at the time. He was broke, he had a nose for alcohol, and a huge sense of entitlement. Considered something of a ne'er-do-well by the local townsfolk, most people figured Billy Faulkner would never amount to much. But even then, William Faulkner thought he was destined for greatness. Although he had no idea he'd one day win the Nobel Prize for Literature, he wouldn't have been surprised if you told him. He thought himself pretty special. In other words, Billy Faulkner was something of a jerk. He was also, as you might expect, the world's worst post office employee. This brief excerpt from the beginning of the story lasts about 6 minutes. If you like it enough that you want to hear more, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll probably just delete the whole thing and pretend it never happened. Since the story is told by a very elderly Southern gentleman, I'm going to adopt his voice, so bear with me. And now for part 1 of The Mail is a Sacred Trust. Old Billy Faulkner was just about the biggest lie in Lafayette County, or so my father told me. The first time I saw him, my father and I were standing in Oxford Town Square underneath the courthouse clock. Old Billy, who weren't yet 20, but whose reputation had been building for years, was walking in front of the Confederate soldier that stood on a plinth in the center of the square. I always thought that statue's relaxed posture, with its hands resting lightly on the rifle barrel, was hardly the attitude of a fighting man, but no bother. Truth be told, our town square was more like an oval, but people still called it the square. It was the heart of our small village, and we took pride in its beauty, though we didn't necessarily say as much. At 5 feet 6 inches, Billy was short, so it didn't make a striking impression. But it wasn't his height that called attention that day. The fellow walking towards us with his clipped mustache and erect bearing was the smartest dressed man I'd ever seen, and that included in church. He wore the dress uniform of an RAF officer and was carrying a swagger stick, which seemed better suited to a personage several ranks higher. I'd never seen such a get-up outside the motion pictures, but it made an impression upon me that I carried to this day. What's more, he sported a limp, suggesting he'd been wounded in the war. The Great War, I mean, not the Civil one. Whether or not it was a bona fide war wound, I couldn't say, but my father sincerely doubted it. It was the kind of limp that changed depending on who was watching. Since it was just my father and me, old Billy was favoring his leg only slightly that day. "Who is that, Pa?" "That be Billy Faulkner," my father replied, then muttered under his breath, "Damnedest son of a bitch you'll ever meet." This opened my eyes some, 'cause Pa was not known to swear. But as my attention concentrated on the figure coming towards us, I could see Billy Faulkner wasn't something you'd see in a town like Oxford every day. "Look at that jackass," my father said, referring to Billy's crisp olive green tunic with its cloth belt cinched tight around his waist. "Who he think he is, General Pershing?" Now, my pa was not an educated man, but he knew when someone was putting on airs, and it seemed to him that if Billy Faulkner got any more highfalutin, he'd drift into the sky like a balloon lost at the county fair. "I seen more combat milking cows than Billy Faulkner ever saw in Europe," my father said, squeezing my hand tightly, whether out of love or irritation I couldn't say. "You best watch out for him, son. He just as soon lie than tell you the correct time of day. It comes as natural as breathing to him." It's true. Billy Faulkner was a braggart and a liar. You couldn't believe a word that came out of his mouth, including something as simple as how he spelled his name. But I didn't know that then. I had to take my father's word for it. It was 1918, and we were visiting Oxford on one of our supply gathering trips. Lumber prices were high, and we'd found ourselves with a little extra money for a change. Mother had a hankering for Ingram's Milkwood Cream, and the only place to get it was from the Sears catalog. So when a jar of the stuff finally arrived at the post office, she'd sent Daddy and me to collect it. The Sears catalog was something treasured in our house. It was an 800-page encyclopedia of anything you'd ever wanted, plus a few things you didn't know you yet wanted. The fact it only came once a year made it all the more precious. It provided hours of pleasurable reading, and I spent more time studying it than I ever did the Bible. It contained everything to fascinate a boy, from a pocket danger to fireproof overalls, not to mention a 5-bedroom house you could assemble yourself. Of course, the minute that new catalog arrived, the old one was consigned to the outhouse as toilet paper. It hardly seemed right given how much joy it brought me, but I read it there too. I took note of Billy Faulkner after that. I didn't become friends with him straight off. The difference in our age was too great. But my pa had told me enough to get my curiosity up, so I kept my eye on him. To be continued.